The village sat where red dust met rising concrete, like an old story learning how to speak a new language. In the mornings, the wind would sweep across the red earth roads, lifting thin clouds of dust that clung to sandals and bicycle tires. On one side stood mud brick houses, their walls warm from the sun, their doors painted in fading blues and greens. On the other side rose new cement buildings with iron gates and shiny windows that reflected the sky like proud mirrors. People said the village was standing at a crossroads. One foot was planted in the soil of ancestors, and the other was stepping toward the city. Goats still wandered freely between compounds, and women still pounded yam in wooden mortars. Yet, at the same time, young men walked past with polished shoes and dreams folded neatly in their pockets. Change moved slowly, like a river in the dry season, but it moved. At the heart of the village stood the ancient baobab tree. Its trunk was thick and scarred by time, its branches stretching wide like arms that had embraced generations. Beneath that tree, elders gathered every afternoon. They wore flowing robes and caps stitched with symbols older than memory. Their voices were calm but firm, for when they spoke, they carried the weight of fathers and grandfathers before them. No quarrel was too small for the baobab. Disputes over land, over marriage, over wandering goats, all found their way to its shade. The tree had heard secrets whispered through tears. It had seen young men kneel for forgiveness. It had watched justice fall like careful rain. "Remember," the oldest elder would often say, tapping his staff against the ground, "a village without wisdom is like a drum without skin. It cannot make a sound." The young ones listened, even when their eyes drifted toward the future. For under the same sky that held the baobab, boys and girls carried smartphones in their hands. They took pictures of sunsets and sent messages to cousins in the city. They spoke of tall buildings, bright lights, and jobs that did not stain the hands with soil. Yet when they passed an elder, they bent slightly in respect. "Good afternoon, Papa." "May your day be long, Mama." They lived between two worlds, one shaped by tradition, the other by ambition. Some believed you could carry both without dropping either. Others feared one would crush the other. It was in such a village that the wedding of Amina and Kofi was announced, and the news spread faster than harmattan fire. On the morning of the ceremony, the red dust rose like it was dancing. Drums echoed across the fields, deep and alive, calling people from their homes. Women wrapped themselves in bright Ankara fabrics, yellow like ripe mango, red like sunset fire, blue like river water. Beads clinked around necks and wrists. Laughter rolled through the air like thunder before rain. Children ran between the crowd, chasing each other, their bare feet kicking up dust. The scent of spiced rice and roasted meat floated from cooking pots large enough to feed an army. The elders sat together in places of honor. Prayers were spoken. Blessings were poured over the couple like sacred oil. "May your home be strong," one elder declared. "May your children rise like palm trees," another added. "May truth live between you," whispered an old woman whose eyes had seen more seasons than anyone could count. The wedding was not only a celebration of love. It was a display of family honor. It was proof that two houses could join without shame. Every dance step, every drumbeat, carried pride. Then Amina stepped forward, and the crowd softened into silence. She was known across the village as the girl whose beauty could still a room. Her skin looked smooth as polished clay. Her lips shone like berries after rain. Her brows were shaped perfectly, framing eyes that seemed calm and distant at the same time. Women leaned toward each other. "Have you ever seen such a bride?" one whispered. "She shines like morning light," another replied, though envy flickered in her voice. No one had ever seen Amina without her makeup. Not at the river where women washed clothes. Not during heavy rains. Not even during childhood games long ago. Her face was always flawless, always prepared. Some admired her discipline. Others questioned it quietly. But Amina moved like a queen among them, silent and graceful. She smiled when required, bowed when elders blessed her, and kept her words few. Her silence added to her mystery. It made people wonder what thoughts lived behind those painted eyes. Kofi stood beside her, tall and proud. He had returned from the city with success stitched into his clothes. He spoke confidently but still greeted elders with respect. Many said he was the perfect balance between modern ambition and traditional loyalty. As he looked at Amina, Admiration filled his face. "I am blessed," he murmured to his friend. "Look at her. Even the sun is jealous." His friend laughed. "Guard your treasure well." The drums rose again. The women ululated loudly, their voices sharp and joyful. Dust swirled around dancing feet. The ancestors were called upon to witness the union. Yet beneath the joy, the village watched carefully. For in such a place, marriage was not only about two hearts. It was about reputation. It was about what others would say when the drums grew quiet. And though Amina smiled brightly, something deep inside her trembled like a leaf before a storm. As the day moved toward evening, the sun dipped low, painting the village in gold. The red dust glowed softly. The baobab trees stood tall, silent and watchful as always. For it had seen many weddings. It had seen laughter turn to tears. It had seen secrets bloom like flowers and then wither under truth. And as Amina's beauty shone under the fading light, the village celebrated what it could see, unaware of the story that waited beneath the surface, like roots hidden deep under red earth. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the red dust roads in shades of gold and amber. Amina moved carefully along the paths, her steps quiet, almost reverent. No one had ever seen her face bare, and she guarded it as a warrior guards her shield. Rainstorms made her nervous, river gatherings were avoided, for water might betray the years of careful artistry. Her makeup had become more than decoration, it was her armor, a mask that kept the world from seeing the truth she feared would break hearts. Kofi returned to the village on a sunlit afternoon, his shoes scuffing the red dust but his eyes carrying the sharpness of the city. He had left as a boy who knew the village rhythms and returned as a man who could command them in new ways. People whispered as he passed, pointing to his neatly pressed clothes, the coins glinting at his waist, and the confident way he carried himself. But Kofi's heart was not full of pride alone. It was drawn irresistibly to Amina, to the quiet strength that shimmered behind her carefully painted eyes. "Have you seen Amina today?" a neighbor whispered. "She will be the jewel of this village," another replied, shaking her head with admiration and a touch of envy. Kofi believed, as many elders had taught him, that beauty was a blessing from the gods. A woman whose face shone with perfection carried favor not only for herself but for her family, for her husband. He had heard it in hushed tones during village ceremonies, in proverbs passed down by ancestors, "A bright face carries a bright destiny." And when he saw Amina, even from afar, he felt the weight of those words in his chest. Yet, not all whispers carried admiration. Women leaned against mud walls, folding their hands and twisting their lips in quiet judgment. "How does she keep it so flawless?" one asked, lowering her voice as though the winds themselves would carry gossip straight to the young bride. "It is too perfect, not like any of us." Another shook her head. "I fear what lies beneath that mask." Suspicion and envy rippled quietly through the corners of the village, growing with each glance cast at the girl who never met water. That evening, beneath the great baobab tree, the village elder watched the bustle with knowing eyes. Her hands rested upon the gnarled trunk as if drawing wisdom from its roots. "Child," she said softly to a young girl standing nearby, "a face that fears water hides what the heart dares not speak. Truth cannot live behind powder, it seeks the open sky." Her voice was calm but heavy, carrying the weight of generations who had learned the hard way that secrets, no matter how beautiful, always demand their reckoning. Kofi's gaze lingered on Amina from across the square. He did not see the whispers, the envy, or the quiet doubts. He saw the calmness in her eyes, the grace in her movements, and he believed that what was hidden was less important than the spirit it protected. Yet the elder's words lingered in the wind, curling around the red dust and reaching even him, that even beauty, divine as it might appear, could not shield a soul from the need for truth. The village moved around them, celebrating, watching, whispering, but beneath the songs and laughter, the stage was being quietly set. Masks were ready to fall. Eyes were ready to see. And the wind, carrying the whispers of women and the caution of elders, stirred the first hint of the storm that would soon change everything. The day had given way to evening, and the village that had danced to drums and ululations now held its breath in the soft glow of lanterns and fading sunlight. Amina's mother hovered nearby, adjusting her daughter's fabric with hands that trembled despite years of experience. "Perhaps you should rest, child," she whispered, her voice tight. "The river, the cleansing, you mustn't overexert yourself." Amina nodded slightly, though her face remained calm behind the mask of powder and rouge. "I feel unwell, Mama," she murmured. Her words were careful, almost ritualistic, hiding more than just fatigue. The women around her paused, exchanging quiet glances. Some felt concern, others suspicion. No one dared question further. The wedding was sacred, and silence often outweighed curiosity. Even the elders who watched from under the baobab tree said nothing, letting tradition proceed without disruption. The air was thick with the scent of incense and expectation, and beneath it, the first tremors of unease stirred quietly. Night fell, stretching across the village like a heavy cloth. Laughter from children and music from the drums faded, leaving the compound in hushed anticipation. The time had come for the bride to perform the sacred cleansing, washing away the adornments of the day to join her husband in honesty. Amina's hands trembled, delicate fingers brushing the folds of her fabric. "Kofi," she said softly, her voice catching. "I." He reached for her, placing a firm but gentle hand over hers. "Amina," he said, "marriage cannot be built on shadows. Tonight begins with truth. Let us see each other clearly." Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She wanted to obey, yet the fear coiled in her stomach like a serpent. She hesitated at the edge of the water, every instinct screaming that the world would not recognize the face beneath the paint. Kofi stepped closer. "It is not just cloth we remove, Amina," he said quietly, "but the masks of the heart. I need to know you, truly know you, before the night carries us forward." A silence fell, thick as the harmattan dust in the dry season. Then came the click of the lock. Not a punishment, but a shield against the prying eyes and the village whispers. The door sealed the world outside and made a sacred space inside, a place where truth and fear could meet unguarded. The drums were gone, and the silence seemed almost alive, pressing against the walls and the faces of the two standing inside. Amina's hands shook, a leaf trembling before the harmattan wind. Sweat beaded at her temples, but she did not wipe it away. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. Kofi's eyes, once soft with admiration, now searched hers with careful attention. Something was hidden, and the man who had loved her beauty sensed there was more than powder at stake. Confusion clouded his mind, suspicion crackling quietly like fire in dry clay. "Amina, what is it you fear?" he asked, voice low, patient, carrying the weight of both love and expectation. She could not speak, and in that silence, the room grew heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, the village slept, unaware that behind the simple wooden door, the first threads of revelation were beginning to unravel. Masks could not last forever, and the night had come to witness what daylight had never dared reveal. Her hands continued to tremble, and he simply waited, not with anger but with the unwavering belief that honesty, however painful, was the beginning of their shared path. The mystery hung between them, palpable and tense, asking silently, "What lies beneath the perfect face?" The room held its breath, and for the first time, Amina's heart trembled not just with fear, but with the first stirring of courage. The night was alive with flames that devoured the house as if it were paper in the hands of a careless child. Smoke curled into the sky like dark snakes, and the smell of burning timber and thatched roofs clawed at the village's memory. Amina, small and trembling, was pulled from the fire by neighbors who had braved the heat. Her family's screams and the roar of the flames would forever echo in her mind, a chorus of loss and survival. Her skin bore the silent witnesses of that night, scars tracing maps of pain, proof that she had survived what others could not. The fire had destroyed a home, but it had carved a destiny that she could never erase. In the village that followed rigid rules of beauty, those marks were a dangerous secret. Whispers moved like wind through the compounds. A child who wears scars cannot hope for a husband. The elders nodded in agreement behind closed doors, and neighbors' eyes lingered with judgment. Beauty was not just admired, it was currency, and Amina's scars rendered her coinless. From a young age, she understood that love was conditional, offered only to the unmarked. Fear, carefully planted by society, took root before she could even name it. At the threshold of womanhood, suitors came and went. When they glimpsed her bare face, hope fled like birds at sunrise. "I cannot," they would mutter, stepping back, leaving her standing with a heart heavy and humiliated. She carried the shame home like water pots filled to the brim, each rejection splashing over her shoulders and staining her pride. Her family, once proud of their daughter, now bore the weight of whispers and sideways glances. The village judged them not for raising a child who had survived fire, but for presenting her with a face that society refused to accept. Then, as if by fate, a traveling woman entered her life. She carried with her boxes of powders, rouge, and oils, each bottle smelling of distant lands and possibility. "Child," she said, voice like warm rain, "sometimes the face you show the world is the one you must make yourself." Under her guidance, Amina learned to blend powders like weaving a tapestry, crafting beauty stroke by stroke, layer by layer. Makeup became armor, concealing what the village would scorn and revealing what she wished to present, a new identity forged in secrecy and skill. Over the years, the powders and pigments became as familiar as her own skin. In the mirror, she saw not only her reflection but the life she had built from fear. The painted face became a second skin, shielding her from cruelty and creating a version of herself the world could accept. She whispered to her reflection, "If love cannot see this, perhaps it is not love at all." And in this armor, she found a fragile courage. Her mother, watching from behind closed curtains, remained silent. Pride and fear outweighed honesty. She knew that revealing the truth of Amina's face would invite village shame and gossip, tainting their family's name. So she allowed the paints and powders to flourish, choosing perfection over truth, choosing social honor over maternal transparency. Each brushstroke on Amina's face was a shield not only for her daughter but for the family itself. And in a village where tradition declared that a bride's beauty reflected the lineage, every painted smile, every flawless contour carried more weight than anyone could measure. Marriage was a contract of appearances as much as hearts. Amina's face, perfected by fear and skill, bore the unbearable responsibility of her family's honor. One glimpse of the unmasked truth could undo years of pride, erase carefully woven reputations, and shatter the fragile balance that held their lives together. In the quiet moments before the wedding, as lanterns flickered and drums beat in distant fields, Amina stood before the mirror, fingers lightly brushing her cheeks. Beneath the paint, the scars slept, unseen by the world. And she knew, deep in her heart, that the night to come would demand more than powders could conceal. It would demand truth, courage, and a reckoning that even fire could not have foretold. Amina's hands hovered over the small mirror, fingers trembling as they traced the contours of her painted face. Each stroke of powder was more than decoration. It was a shield, a barrier against a world that would not understand her scars. Her reflection shimmered back at her, flawless, calm, untouchable. Yet behind the mask, fear coiled tightly in her chest. The village valued smooth skin and bright lips as proof of worth, and she had learned early that truth could be deadly. To protect herself, she had spent years crafting perfection, and now that armor felt like both a prison and a burden. Kofi stepped closer, eyes soft yet searching. "Amina," he said, voice low but firm. "Why do you hesitate?" She flinched, not from his tone, but from the invisible weight of years pressing down upon her. He could feel it too, the tension, the quiet trembling of a bride who had always hidden her true self. Pride and love wrestled within him. He had adored this woman for her grace, her calm, her beauty, but now a shadow of doubt tugged at the edges of his heart. Betrayal, though unnamed, burned quietly. He closed his eyes for a moment and remembered the elder's words from the baobab tree, "Marriage is not cloth you wear outside, it is skin you carry within." The proverb echoed like a drumbeat in his mind, pressing him toward understanding, toward choice. His anger softened, replaced by reflection. Could love survive beyond the surface, beyond appearances? Amina's composure cracked. Tears slid down her cheeks, tracing paths through the carefully applied pigments. She fell to her knees, shaking, voice trembling. "If you see me, if you see what I truly am, you will send me away," she whispered. "The village will laugh. They will mock me, and you, and my family." Kofi knelt beside her, hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure whether to touch, to soothe, or simply bear witness. The fear in her eyes was raw, the terror of becoming a living joke, of shame stretching wider and deeper than any scar the fire had left. Her reputation, fragile as dry clay, seemed ready to shatter at the slightest touch. The room grew still, and the air thickened with the weight of unspoken truths. The real battle was no longer about the face beneath the makeup. It was about trust. Could love endure when built on hidden fears? Could honesty outweigh years of carefully woven deception? Kofi's gaze softened, steadying himself against the storm of emotion. "Amina," he said quietly, "I do not know what you hide, but I must know you as you are, or we cannot begin at all." Her sobs slowed, but the tension stretched between them like the long, measured beat of a ceremonial drum. Outside, the village slept, unaware that inside this locked room, hearts were weighed, truths were poised, and the first step toward either betrayal or forgiveness hung trembling in the air. In that silence, the choice formed, not of condemnation, but of the possibility that love might survive even the deepest hidden truths. The mask no longer mattered. The question now was whether trust could rise from the shadows where fear had dwelled for so long. The wooden door clicked into place with a weight that seemed heavier than mere wood. Outside, the echoes of drums and ululations faded into the distance, leaving the courtyard empty of celebration. The villagers' laughter and songs became a memory, carried only by the wind across the red dust roads. Inside, the room held its own kind of rhythm, a quiet tension, as if the air itself were listening. Kofi did not lock the door in anger. His eyes were steady, his hands calm. This was not punishment but protection. The world outside, with its gossiping eyes and whispered judgments, would wait. Here, only truth could speak. He stepped closer, voice low at first, carrying the gentleness of a man who had loved and cherished her from afar. "Amina," he said softly, "tonight begins with honesty. I do not ask for perfection. I ask for truth." Her breath hitched. He spoke with an authority that went beyond anger, a command rooted in the sacredness of marriage, in the understanding that vows were more than words. They were trust, respect, and shared vulnerability. Confusion flickered across his face, then firm determination. "No more masks," he added. "No more hiding behind colors and powder. If we are to walk this path together, it must be without illusions." Amina's heart raced, a drumbeat in the silence of the room. The mask she had worn for so many years suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Escape was no longer possible. Fear pressed against her chest like a stone, cold and unyielding. The silence thickened, settling around them like harmattan dust in the dry season. There was no sound but their breathing, the quiet tension waiting for the first move. A single tear escaped from the corner of her eye, tracing a path across the carefully painted perfection she had built over years. It carved through foundation and pride alike, and she trembled as if releasing not just a drop of water, but a lifetime of fear. Slowly, reverently, she reached up and began to wipe away the layers of powder. Each motion was deliberate, a ritual of surrender. With every stroke, the paint fell away like dried leaves in the dry season, fluttering softly to the floor. The protective shield she had relied on for so long disintegrated, leaving her standing bare between truth and the possibility of ruin. Her reflection, once carefully crafted, now revealed a raw and unvarnished self. Dim lamplight fell across her skin, revealing scars that told stories fire could not finish. They were marks of survival, of endurance, of nights when she had faced pain and emerged. The room held its breath, and even Kofi stepped back slightly, awe threading his eyes. These were not signs of weakness, they were symbols of courage, of a life that had endured both fire and fear. For the first time, the truth between them was not hidden. It was alive, palpable, and sacred. He reached out, voice steady but filled with wonder. "Amina, your beauty was never in the paint. It was always here," he whispered, placing a hand gently over her heart. And in that quiet, the room became a witness to something older than fear, trust beginning to take root where deception had once lived. The room held its breath. Not a word passed between them, yet the silence carried more weight than the loudest drum from the village square. The air seemed thick, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were listening. In that quiet, truth stood naked, unadorned and unyielding. Kofi's eyes traced every line, every curve, every scar that told stories long hidden, and the absence of sound made judgment feel inevitable. It was a silence louder than any celebration, heavier than any insult, a pause pregnant with destiny. Kofi's heart jolted as if struck by lightning under a clear sky. The beauty he had admired for so long, the perfection that had enchanted him, that had seemed to promise love, was now replaced by a truth he had never imagined. His breath caught in his throat, caught somewhere between disbelief and the sudden dawning of understanding. For a moment, the world outside could have been burning, and he would not have noticed. Yet his hurt did not come from what he saw, but from what had been hidden. The deeper wound was the deception, the years of careful concealment. Trust, once whole, now felt cracked like clay left too long under the scorching sun. The pain of realizing love had been built on hidden ground pressed against him, sharp and relentless. It was a betrayal not of appearance, but of faith in the person he thought he knew. Amina sank to her knees, body trembling, eyes lowered, hands folded before her as the village elders might have taught. This was tradition's posture, a plea for mercy, a silent apology. Her heart pounded as if counting the seconds before condemnation would fall. She imagined him turning away, sending her back into the night before the first light of dawn. The weight of shame pressed down, making the floor beneath her feel harder, more real. Her voice broke the silence, trembling like leaves in a storm wind. I feared that without beauty, no one would take me. That love would pass me by and leave only whispers in the red dust. Each word carried the weight of years spent hiding, of nights spent convincing herself that paint could be armor, and that illusion could be love. I built my love on what I thought you would want, because I could not bear the thought of being rejected, not by you, not by anyone. Her imagination raced, conjuring the morning fire where women would whisper her shame, where her family name would be dragged across the dust for all to see. The thought burned hotter than any childhood flames, hotter than the night fire that had once marked her life. She trembled not just with fear, but with the realization that her own choices had built this bridge between herself and possible ruin. Kofi remained still, watching her. The room seemed suspended between judgment and understanding, between the past and the possibility of forgiveness. And in that quiet, the first seeds of reckoning began to take root, as two hearts faced the hardest truth of all. Can love survive when trust has been tested by fear? Kofi stood still, the quiet of the room pressing around him like the walls themselves were listening. He could feel the weight of generations on his shoulders, the invisible eyes of ancestors who had guided his family for centuries. To send her away now would be more than personal rejection. It would cast a shadow across not just her heart, but the lineage of her parents, the name that had been honored and protected for decades. Divorce on a wedding night, he knew, was not merely a private shame, it was a curse passed silently from one generation to the next. The red dust roads outside might remain unchanged, but the stain on their family names could not be washed away so easily. He remembered his grandmother's voice, sharp and steady, rising from memory as if she were leaning on the old wooden railing once more. "Scars," she had said, "are not wounds to hide. They are maps of survival. Each mark tells a story that the world must not judge, only respect." Her lessons had been woven into his youth, stories shared beside the fire, about women and men who carried their histories in their skin, who endured hardship and rose stronger. Now, in the dim light of the bridal room, that wisdom pressed on his heart, softening the anger that had begun to burn. He felt the fury in his chest loosen, as if ancestral hands had laid themselves across his shoulders. Pride, so sharp a blade moments before, began to step back. He realized that love that depended solely on surface beauty was fragile. Truth, even when painful, held far more strength than any painted illusion. The echoes of shallow admiration, he now understood, would crumble under a storm of honesty, but trust built from truth could endure the fiercest winds. Kofi's gaze settled on Amina, kneeling like one who had confessed before the elders. The crossroads before him were clear: punish her for deception, or embrace mercy and redefine the meaning of love. His mind measured the cost of ego against the price of compassion. Would he let societal cruelty dictate their marriage, or would he lift them both toward a higher truth, where character outshone appearances and courage outweighed fear? The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his choice, the question echoing louder than drums ever could: redefine beauty or repeat the cycle of shame. He stepped forward, reaching out his hands. "Stand," he said gently, and she obeyed, trembling yet rising. In that single motion, he chose mercy over pride, compassion over wounded ego. The first act of forgiveness broke the chain of shame that had threatened to bind them both. Kofi took her hands in his, letting his gaze meet hers. "Marriage cannot breathe behind a mask," he said firmly. "No more hiding, no more painted lies. Truth alone is the price of love here. From this moment forward, we honor honesty as the foundation of what we build together." The words hung in the air, strong and unwavering, a declaration that love would no longer be measured by powder or paint, but by courage, trust, and the willingness to face the world without fear. Amina's tears fell freely now, unguarded and cleansing. Each drop seemed to wash away not just the remnants of powder, but the fear that had weighed on her chest for so long. Relief spread through her like a gentle rain over parched soil, softening the hard edges of years spent hiding. In the quiet of the marriage room, where the door had kept the world at bay, redemption began to root itself in the spaces that deception had once claimed. She let her hands fall to her lap, trembling less with fear and more with the strange, sweet freedom of truth finally spoken. The first rays of dawn spilled over the village rooftops, catching on the red dust of the courtyard as Amina stepped outside without a trace of makeup. The sun seemed to bless her courage, highlighting not blemish or scar, but the strength in her gaze. For the first time, the world saw her not as a mask of beauty, but as a woman who had claimed her own story. "Today," she whispered to herself, "I walk as I truly am." Each step carried a quiet defiance, a bravery far more radiant than any cosmetic glow. Voices in the compound stilled. Women paused mid-gossip, mid-ululation, as truth stood among them. Gasps spread like wind through dry grass, touching the windows and doorways, making even the street children stop and stare. The village confronted its own long-held standards, the harsh whispers of expectation meeting the living proof that courage could outweigh perfection. Some faces mirrored shock, others hesitation, but all eyes followed her with the weight of recognition. Amina straightened, shoulders back, chin lifted. Scars traced the contours of her cheeks, but they did not shame her. They spoke of survival, endurance, and the refusal to bow to fear. Strength replaced trembling, and dignity reshaped the narrative the village had expected to tell. She walked slowly, deliberately, letting each motion proclaim the unyielding truth of her heart. Whispers began again, but their tone shifted. Some voices, once sharp with envy, softened into admiration. Others, hesitant at first, found themselves nodding, recognizing the courage it took to stand exposed and unashamed. What had begun as judgment slowly transformed into respect. The village, one pair of eyes at a time, began to reconsider the weight it placed on appearances. Under the ancient baobab, the elder woman watched with quiet satisfaction. Her lined face broke into a small smile as she saw the proverb she had long spoken unfold in reality. Truth had prevailed, and the wisdom of their ancestors proved alive and just. No illusion could hold against honesty when guided by courage. The family, who had once feared disgrace, now exhaled in relief. Acceptance replaced dread, and the marriage, once teetering on the edge of ruin, found solid ground. The villagers learned a lesson that no words could have conveyed. Scars do not curse a home, truth and bravery can bless it. On the wind, the moral carried itself gently across the harmattan-swept streets. True beauty resides in courage, not in the smoothness of skin. Deception is born of fear, and love, tested and purified by truth, becomes unbreakable. The society that once created the lie now witnessed the strength it had overlooked. At the river's edge, Amina knelt, dipping her hands into the flowing water. She washed her face publicly, each motion a sacred act of renewal, each ripple a witness to the life she claimed for herself. Water became more than cleansing, it was freedom, a symbol that the past, with all its hiding, could be released. As she walked back along the familiar red dust road, the village around her unchanged yet ever watching, her steps carried a new heart. Confidence replaced fear, pride replaced hesitation, and a quiet smile settled on her lips. She moved as one reborn, yet grounded in the soil that had raised her. And from the lips of elders, whispered to children and carried across the village like wind through the harmattan, the proverb echoed, "A face washed in truth shines brighter than gold covered in powder." The story ended not in shame, but in the luminous clarity of enlightenment, passed gently from one generation to the next.